Hey guys, LevelCap here, and today we're taking a look at Update 7 for the World War II FPS game Hell Let Loose. This update adds a new map set in the iconic city of Carentan, implements a complete overhaul of all character animations, and improves gun audio across the board. It's an absolutely massive update to the game, possibly one of the biggest, and there's a ton to talk about, so let's get into it. And really, I can't start off with talking about anything other than the performance. Hell Let Loose has never run particularly well. On medium settings, so you can expect a fairly inconsistent frame rate of 60 to 80 FPS depending on your resolution and hardware. It also varies from map to map, but there's definitely something up with Carentan. When I first loaded into the new map, I was getting maybe 15 FPS. This persisted for several minutes and was happening even on low settings. Eventually, it leveled out to around 35 to 40 FPS, which is a little more playable, but obviously far from ideal. Now, Carentan was expected to be more demanding to run because it's the game's first urban environment and it's brand new, but it seems like something might have actually been wrong with the update itself. The devs are looking into it, so hopefully they'll get a hotfix out to address it soon, because let's be honest, in the long run, a 35 to 45 FPS rate is just not going to be a playable situation. So, forcing performance issues to the sideline for the time being, assuming that they will be addressed in the future, I'm actually blown away by this update, both figuratively and, well, literally. The new animations are a night and day improvement. Hell Let Loose is a methodical game, but the previous animations look like stick figure animations from a 2003 Newgrounds Flash animation game, if you want an old reference in there. Now they look smooth and natural. In first person, all of the weapon handling and movement animations have been updated, and it doesn't feel like your gun is just floating in front of you anymore. All of your directional changes affect the rotation and position of the weapon. Jumping over cover has a slick look to it that makes the relatively long animation feel snappier. Just overall, all the new animations feel fantastic. My only complaint lies with the first-person perspective animations in that crawling while prone has a ton of head bob. If you suffer from motion sickness in games, this is going to make you a bit queasy. Now, the third-person animations are a massive improvement. Enemy and friendly soldiers all have a sense of momentum and fluidity to their walk and run cycles. Now that makes tracking and identifying their directions much easier, basically second nature. It used to look almost like enemies were cardboard cutouts on a stick, but now they move much more realistically. It's also much easier to tell when they're performing specific actions like switching to a grenade or aiming down sights. The blending between animations does a great job of conveying actions, and you can clearly see enemies putting their primary weapon away to pull out a grenade. Going forward, it's going to be hard for new players to really understand just how big of an improvement this animation overhaul is. The animations are not zany or over the top like in some games. They add the immersion by being natural and realistic without bogging down the game's feel with overly long or drawn out animations for every action. So the animation system is just, in general, a massive improvement that will affect every map in the game. Now, as for the new map, Carentan, it's pretty fantastic in terms of how it looks and plays. Overall, I'd say it's probably my favorite map in the game right now. It certainly feels like a proper World War II environment based on, watching Band of Brothers. All of the destroyed buildings and rubble give it that war-torn sense of immersion without hurting visibility or making it a nightmare to traverse. And it is refreshing to see how well the gameplay holds up in such a dramatically different environment. Most of the other maps in Hell Let Loose are wide open plains dotted with small villages. You spend a lot of time on those maps crawling through the mud along a bush line or a ridge, often only getting domed by a sniper the second you pop up. It's not to say that the other maps aren't good, but sometimes a little variety can go a long way. And Carentan offers that variety in spades, and not just from the other maps, but within itself as well. It's a good blend of rural and urban areas. Now, going into it, I was expecting to get mowed down by players camping in buildings or tanks roaming the city's outskirts, but my experience so far has been pretty much the exact opposite. Aside from a few long sight lines, most of the combat takes place at ground level around the objective areas. Now, I'm sure as meta for the map starts to develop, machine gun nests and other entrenched positions will become favored by players, But right now, I don't have much of anything negative to say aside from, well, the glaring performance issues. There's plenty of flanking rafts that take you through a variety of environments despite being full of choke points. The ebb and flow of matches was very smooth and consistent. My team would push towards the enemy objectives, capture them, get pushed back a little, break the enemy front line, and keep moving. There was a lot of enemies flanking us, but it never turned into a back cap situation where the enemy kept stealing our points from behind. The surrounding rural land also adds a lot of variety to the map. Having all this space to maneuver through on your approach to the city opens up your options. In many games, the urban maps are either all urban or have a very linear path through them. They restricts flanks and approaches from the sides of the map. Carentan is much more open, and honestly, it's just really refreshing seeing a map with this kind of variety. Now, one of the other significant improvements made with Update 7 was to the gun audio. All the gun sounds have been reworked, overhauled to sound more natural, brutal, and realistic. The environment now changes how your weapon sounds. So if you're standing in a field, your gunfire will have a different tone than if you're standing in a forest or inside of a building. Now, if I'm being honest, aside from the performance, this was probably the other aspect of the update that I was more let down by. The new weapon sounds are an improvement for sure, but it's still extremely tough to tell where enemy gunfire is coming from. You could have soldiers shooting directly in front of you, but still have no idea exactly where they are. It feels like locating your target based on gunfire isn't specific enough. Instead of it sounding like a gun is being fired at a pinpoint location, it sounds like there's just a big wall of gunfire coming from a general direction. I'd certainly hesitate to call it bad, but I think it could be improved significantly. And based on what the devs have been saying about audio, they are still working on it. Now, there's also some less significant changes to the game, but they certainly merit talking about. The Foy map overhaul is pretty impressive. I didn't play much on it before the update, but the new lighting and strong points are a huge improvement. The patch notes describe the new lighting as being photoreal, and to be honest, I think it's pretty spot on. With maxed out settings, it does actually look incredible. Of course, good luck playing the game at those settings. And like most rural maps, getting across the field as an infantry player is a tall order, but everything has been reworked to better suit vehicles, so you shouldn't have to cross open fields too often assuming your tank actually pushes into the objective areas. There's also been a ton of changes to how garrisons and outposts work. You can't place a garrison on neutral or enemy control sectors anymore. This should massively cut down on teams just appearing behind the front lines constantly. Also, players can't spawn on a garrison if an enemy is within 15 meters. This sounds a lot more restrictive than it is. In practice, I spawned and got into combat within seconds plenty of times. I think it's just sort of a safety measure to try and avoid some of the spawn camping. The minimum distance between friendly garrisons now is 100 meters. This should keep the distribution of garrisons a bit more even. Outposts also got a pretty big buff. They can now be placed on a 120-second cooldown. I found this kind of annoying just because the enemy team would put multiple outposts down near our garrison, and it made getting out of our spawn area a bit of a nightmare. Now, as for future updates, the patch notes discuss what's in the works for the next few updates. Engineers will eventually be able to build defensive locations. A historical game option is being looked at that players can enable to ensure all soldiers are wearing the correct uniforms on the right maps. The transport and supply vehicles are in the works. 3 new maps are also in the works, as well as an entirely new front line of combat. Now, it goes without saying that Update 7 is a massive improvement to the game. Carentan is exactly the kind of map that players have been waiting for, and all of the other improvements are great. There's definitely several games competing for attention in the historical FPS genre right now, and Hell Let Loose is definitely no slouch. Compared to most of the other indie titles in the genre, the quality of the new animations is such a breath of fresh air. And besides adding in those transport vehicles and making performance updates, Hell Let Loose is starting to feel more like a complete package. Again, the major issue with the game right now is just its performance. If the devs can optimize that in a meaningful way that players without monster systems are able to play the game at a decent frame rate, then I think this game has huge potential. Early access titles by their nature are going to have performance related issues. All the optimization that makes finished games run so well happens at the tail end of development typically. Although getting 15 FPS on Carentan is a massive issue that's probably going to sour the experience for many players. Hopefully the devs can sort that particular issue out quickly, but the game overall needs more optimization. Getting 60 FPS is achievable on most maps with a mid-range PC, however getting a smooth 60 FPS isn't going to happen regardless of the map. Hitching and poor frame times happen regularly regardless of setting, map, or hardware for many players. The Update 7 patch notes specifically call out optimization as something the dev team will focus on soon, but at this point my advice is to make that a top priority. The gameplay is there. The maps are largely there with more on the way. The core design is there. I think it's more important to get the performance up to snuff with their competing titles and then focus on adding all sorts of new features and content. I seriously debated making this video just because of the initial problems I had with Carentan running at 15 FPS, but that issue aside, everything about the update is an absolute win. Hopefully the devs will update the performance in the future and maybe I can make another video at that point. Otherwise, that's all I have for today. If you've been on the fence about Hell Let Loose, I think now is a good time to check it out. What are your thoughts on Update 7 if you have been playing it? Let me know in the comments and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. This is LevelCap signing off.